Hello, I'm Ariana Gosfeld with Voices from Santa Cruz Community Television, and we're here today asking people how they feel about the issue of the Santa Cruz police infiltrating and spying on the organizers of the New Year's Eve parade.
Well, I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah, good.
I think that you have to be very careful to balance the needs for security with the needs of freedom that have been the hallmark of our society.
It seems kind of ridiculous, but I mean, I know there were like 8 stabbings on Halloween, so it seems kind of that they need to step up security.
I think that's terrible. You know, I understand why there's such a everybody's so security conscious in the whole country, but I think we can be a little bit different here, and we're not talking about a terrorist group that they were spying on, and it's just unconscionable, and it's I'm against it.
Well, I think the issue is it should probably not have been undercover. They should have attended if they wanted to, by all means, but been upfront about who they were and why they were there, and they wanted to just protect the safety of everyone. That's a very different approach than incognito and not letting their intentions be known. So I think just being upfront, no hidden agendas, everyone would accept it, and we wouldn't be in the place where there's a lot of uncomfortable, difficult feelings.
Well, you know, I think anytime they do, the police department or any official facility do something like that, it's undermining the people who are actually doing the right thing. I think it's wrong, period. There's no other way to put it. Because you know what? If you did that to the police department, they particularly wouldn't like it, right? So I just don't have any love for the government and the police department having so much stronghold on the citizens. I mean, such as the private sector. Well, you're not going to have any rights after all. I'm a big computer guy, and I'm telling you right now, dude, Big Brother's watching every stroke.
I've heard about it, or I've heard speak of it, but I don't really know much about it.
Yeah. How do you feel about
I feel that people have, or we have the right to do what we want, and I don't think it's right that the police are spying on people. And I don't like it. I don't agree with it.
You know, it just like seems like an extension of George Bush's government. You know, I'm just not crazy about that either. So, you know, in the under the umbrella of Homeland Security, they're doing all kinds of things, and I don't think it's right.
I didn't know there was a New Year's Eve parade.
It's an outrage. Yeah, can't believe that.
It's disturbing. It seems. Thanks. It just, I mean, it seems like that's kind of what the country has been doing, just like spying on people, and it's just like, I'm not surprised, but it's just, it's politics. It's just stupid. It's just the.
Oh, that's bullshit, dude. I mean, the government needs to stop spying on Americans. I mean, what else do they have better to do? I mean, it's like, who is that famous president who says a country is governed best, a country that's governed least is governed best?
I thought the funniest comment was that they felt bad because they didn't identify the undercover guys. But if they identified the undercover guys, they wouldn't be undercover, would they? That sounds like Santa Cruz police.
I strongly disagree with that. I think that, geez, there's so many things I could say about that. But I can't think of any. But in this moment in time, all I can think about is my warm cup of chai. No.
I know. We thought it was something like this is serious stuff.
Yeah, this is serious stuff. It makes me think about the kind of the situation going on right now, that what's happening on campus with the military.
It's unnecessary. I'm not exactly sure. I've read a little bit through the paper about what they've done to investigate it. I'm using that word loosely. Disappointed. I can understand the police chief's concern about having to do it quickly, but he also had the opportunity to say, no, that's not the way to do it. Everyone is in charge of their own responsibilities. No one can dictate how somebody has to do their job. I think he could have probably done a better job at that and said no and waited.
Good evening. Welcome to Voices. I'm Mark Halfmoon. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the issue of undercover operations by the police as occurred here in Santa Cruz, as we know from the headlines in the Santa Cruz Sentinel and various other places. The Santa Cruz Police Department planted undercover operatives inside of a planning meeting for what is called I think it was called Last Night DIY, Do It Yourself. It was a New Year's Eve celebration and a parade, and the police felt they should send undercover officers into the planning meetings to find out what was going on. And we want to discuss today why they did that. And after it was found out, there was a report by the police department that they did an internal investigation, which is yay thick. Now, I read this, I looked through this and read it, and it's 600 pages just about, and I found about 3 or 4 pages worth of information in this. There's a lot of copies of the same thing. I don't mean to get into that right now, but I want to introduce my guest. We're here to talk about this issue. Should the police have the right to send undercover officers into private residences at planning meetings of organizations that are not particularly planning any kind of violent or criminal activity? Here to discuss this issue is community activist Sherry Conable.
Mark.
Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Santa Cruz City Council member Ed Porter.
Good evening.
Is here. Thanks,
for
Ed. Thanks for coming. Former Santa Cruz Mayor Christopher Krohn.
Thank you, Mark, for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. And Santa Cruz City Council member Mike Rotkin. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for inviting me.
So let me see if I have this straight. From what I understand, there was the annual first night celebration that's held downtown. Santa Cruz was not held this year or on New Year's Eve because of funding or some problem like that. And what happened was that an organization calling themselves, I think, Last Night DIY, Do It Yourself, decided to have a parade down the main street itself. I've seen the flyers. They say things like there's going to be clowns and jugglers and musicians and drummers and fire dancers and bring your children, sort of thing. At some point, the police department found out about this and decided to investigate. And the means they used to investigate was to send 2 Santa Cruz police officers undercover with false names to the planning meeting. First of all, I'd like to ask...
To a couple of planning meetings,
a couple? Was it 2?
No, it's been 3 in the
2 or
end.
3 planning meetings. And the first thing I'd like to do is ask the question of all of you, do you think this is proper? Was this the right thing to do? Did the police have reason to send undercover officers to these planning meetings? Let me ask Ed Porter here.
Well, I'll have to directly answer your question by saying I don't think it was proper. However, the police did have reason to be looking at what was going on because it was proposed that this parade was going to block traffic. In fact, I witnessed the fact that it blocked the intersection of Pacific and Laurel for 14 light cycles consecutively. And
well, how did they know this was going to happen? How did they know?
How did they know it was going to happen?
Yeah, that they were going to block traffic.
Because the group organizing the parade had a website and announced what their plans were, and that included this parade without getting a permit and without having the benefit of the police closing any streets or blocking any intersections. So it was clearly planned to do, it's not civil disobedience exactly, because usually civil disobedience involves breaking the law for the intent to accomplish a political purpose. But I guess you'd have to call this civil disobedience for the purpose of having a party or something like that. So it's perplexing in that it's not the usual kind of reason why police do undercover. At the same time, it was planned to break laws. So that's one of the things we need to discuss here tonight.
Yeah, I don't really recall in any of the literature I've seen from the Last Night people that they were planning to break any laws or do any civil disobedience.
The law they were breaking was walking down the middle of the street with a parade without getting a permit for it. And it puts the conflict, which is a very real one. The police had reasons to be concerned about it. That's not to say they did the right thing in responding, but the reason they were concerned is you have children, people on stilts, people involved in a parade, and nobody has a plan for how you're going to actually address the issue of traffic. They're in the middle of Pacific Avenue. There's cars crossing the street. There's cars driving down the street. And typically people get a permit and they work this out, and the combination of monitors that the group puts forward, for example, on Gay Pride, the group puts forward a lot of monitors that help direct the traffic, and they put up sawhorses and so forth. And the permit gives conditions that basically keep the traffic from conflicting with all the, the people that are walking around. So that's the concern in terms of the immediate public safety kind of issue, is that there's a potential conflict between vehicles and people.
Okay, does that justify sending undercover officers to the planning meetings?
No, I mean, the issue, I think, is you have to break this down in a number of different points. Was there a reason why the police would be concerned about what was going to happen generally on New Year's Eve? Yes, because before the first night group started happening about a decade ago, and that's a group that came in, modeled on something that happened in Boston, where people had this idea of having an alcohol-free New Year's Eve downtown. The 2 years before that group started doing their stuff, there had been a bunch of violence downtown. People broke windows. There was a bunch of, as often happens in many places, intoxicated people on the New Year's Eve and so forth.
Right.
And so for about 10 years, this first night group had sort of managed to keep the thing relatively safe, not a lot of problems. So for the 2 years before this year, on Halloween, with 20,000 people down there, there had been all kinds of problems with conflicts with people and drunk people, stabbings, other kinds of issues. So the police have a general concern about public safety on these big crowd nights,
So that's
Halloween, New Year's.
So you're saying that they did have reason to send undercover officers
No.
to the planning meeting?
No. Police
They had
had reason to be
for
concerned
concern.
about what the event that was going to
Okay.
happen down
All right,
there.
all right.
In my own personal opinion, what they should have done is called the group up and said, okay,
Yeah.
you don't want to get a permit, but let's have a discussion about like what your plans are, and let's work out a plan for how to deal with the traffic impacts of what you're talking about, and to also confirm for themselves that this group wasn't planning anything more serious than a conflict with traffic, which,
Okay. Sherry Conable, what do you think about this?
Well, I have a little different view of it because I've spent a lot of time with the organizers of the event, and I think this was a conscious CD action. They chose very publicly to say, we're not going to get a permit. This is how you do a CD action. You say, I'm planning to break the law. You raise your hand. You say you're going to do it. You say where you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, and then you provide conflict managers.
And you expect to be arrested.
And they did that.
And you expect to be arrested in
did
a civil
that.
disobedience
Okay.
event. And they did expect to be arrested.
All right.
They
Go
had
ahead.
people who were going to do conflict management with audience, with police if that was necessary. They had people specified to deal with traffic. They had a cleanup crew that came after the parade to clean up any litter. They really did, I think, a really responsible job. And so the question becomes, if the police felt, the difficulty for the police, I think, is there is a permit process, and usually if you engage the permit process, then you meet with city staff and you go through all of these. So from the point of view of the organizers, the political point is that process can get extremely expensive. My guess it would have cost between $3,000 and $5,000 to hold this parade downtown, given all the costs that would have been assessed by the city.
Really? Is that true?
So one of the things they're saying is that really inhibits our ability to express the First Amendment, to freely assemble, to have a celebration, to express our point of view. So to that extent, it was political. And I just want to read a sentence from the letter the police auditor wrote in response to the investigation, because I think this is really critical. He says, I remain troubled by the fact that the police department, made broad, untested assumptions tantamount to categorical prejudices about the last night DIY organizers as the basis for inserting an undercover team into their midst.
Okay. What were those untested assumptions?
He doesn't say.
He doesn't say. But I guess the assumption might be that they would be violent.
I'm going to jump in here.
Okay,
I have to
Krohn.
echo what one of the person on the street interview said. They were disappointed. I'm quite disappointed. Ed talked about a website. If that's true, the police could have just went to the website and saw what they were doing, come to the organizing meeting, either uniformed or not uniformed, if they're detectives, and identified themselves as such and said, we'd like to work with you all. We've seen what the website says. We have some concerns. Let's express our concerns. Instead, you had two undercover folks, and look at it this way. You had two people who came to meetings in a private home. They didn't identify themselves. They identified themselves using false names and gave false email addresses and false phone numbers. At the same time, talking about a public expense here, there's two officers on duty for 3 meetings, 2+ hour meetings each time. then you have backup officers outside. So you maybe have 4 officers who are monitoring this one organization, which I think a reasonable mind could say that this doesn't present a big threat to the city of Santa Cruz. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but parading without a permit is an infraction. It doesn't rise to the level of misdemeanor or felony. There's a lot of other stuff going on in this community that really needs, and I think people out there can hear me, they need police in their neighborhood. Why are we spending so much time monitoring a group that does not represent a big threat to the city of Santa Cruz?
I'd like to respond to that.
Well, first,
I'd like to respond to that if I could. It's a very direct question.
Yes, I would, but I also want to point out real quick, you did mention, and the report says there were 4 officers on duty during this time, and I believe there were only 6 people who were really organizers of the event. It seems a little like overkill, don't you think?
You have a situation where the police have just come off of a Halloween where 7 people got stabbed, you know, where the year before 2 people got stabbed on one of these big nights where people come down in big crowds. The police would be outrageously irresponsible to not take seriously what's likely to happen on New Year's Eve in downtown Santa Cruz.
Okay.
And the idea that sending 4 officers to try and gather information is a misuse of funds is ridiculous. Ridiculous. What's wrong is they didn't have to go undercover probably. There are other ways to get the information. But this cavalier attitude that somehow the police were out of line to be concerned about potential violence, which is what Christopher just said.
Nobody called it
Why
a
would you
cavalier
put
attitude. Mike, they went into a private home. They didn't identify themselves. That is against the First Amendment. You have this whole thing that's going on in Washington right now. And you have citizens who are upset in this community, rightly so, and now we find out, oh my gosh, is it happening here too? Where are there Homeland Security funds being used in the city of Santa Cruz for things like this, so they have to present results? Oh my gosh, we got to get some results here, and we got to show them how we're spending our Homeland Security money.
Excuse me, but
Mike, they went into
I would like to come back to that.
I've just been interrupted here. Christopher said very cleanly that it wasn't. I'm not talking about the question of whether they should have been undercover. There's not an argument here. There's 4 people who think, I believe, that it was not the right thing for them to do to go undercover to this event.
Okay,
Christopher was suggesting that putting 4 officers into trying to gather information about what was likely to happen downtown on New Year's Eve in Santa Cruz was like an outrageous priority. There's so many more important things to be doing. I think the police had every reason to put a lot of energy into finding out what was going on downtown. The fact of the matter is, these people they applied for a permit and then found that they couldn't afford to pay for it. There's every possibility, had they said, well, we would do this, but we can't afford to pay for it, that the city is so concerned about violence that we would have been happy to have an alternative parade, found a way to pay their permit fees for them. So there's problems on both sides of this. The people doing this parade, they made a statement in front of the council, only rich corporations can afford to parade downtown Santa Cruz. We had 30 parades from local little groups in downtown Santa Cruz last year who found a way to pay the fees.
Well, you said several times that the police had a right to
I just want to say, do it in uniform. Don't do it undercover. Don't go into a private home.
You said the police
it's
have
not
the
right, and it's against the Constitution.
Concerned about the issue, right? Okay, I don't think any of us would argue that. The police can be concerned. They can find out. They can ask questions.
He just made an argument they shouldn't worry. It was a waste of time.
No,
they shouldn't worry about it.
That's what I heard. I said, don't go into a private home and don't identify yourself.
Absolutely. You know, we could debate about what happened for a long time, but I think it's well documented what did happen. And actually, the facts have changed since then. It's time to move on to the next step. And that is that the police department has put a policy in place about this now.
Well,
and I won't read the whole thing.
I want to know what happened first before you read that. Could you tell? You said we know what happened. Can you explain what happened?
Well, I think there was poor communications and bad decisions made, and officers were instructed either by conversation or by omission of affirmative approval to go do undercover work, and they did it. They did what they were told, and I got to say that it is not those officers' fault. This is a problem between the city manager, the police chief, the city council. That's where the debate needs to be right now.
I think we all agree that this was wrong.
The officers did what they were asked to do.
We all agree it was wrong. Whose decision was it? Who made the wrong decision?
It appears that a deputy chief did that. And so
there's 2 deputy chiefs.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'd like for you to read that. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm going to read one sentence because we should understand where things are now. As a result of what happened on New Year's Eve and the planning meetings that led up to it, the policy now is that prior approval by a deputy chief is required before any operations are conducted undercover involving community organizations.
This was
So-
approved by a deputy chief, though, already.
This was approved by the
one
chief.
we're talking about was approved by.
But there's also a policy that says they shouldn't approve it unless they expect violence. There's a either
It
violence.
says here, unless there is reasonable cause to believe that the group or individuals within the group, we're talking about 6 people here, are involved in the planning of or intending to engage in illegal and/or violent activity.
That's right.
The illegal activity we've established are probably infractions, right?
Well, when they went to the event, they didn't know. I mean, you have to be clear about this. When you read the emails that that are now public documents, it makes clear that the police went to this meeting not knowing if they were going to see 60 people there, 100 people there, whatever. They get there and they say, wow, there's only 6 people here. They don't seem to be very well organized.
That's
I think,
right.
in effect, it's a very short little email. That's what it says. So
And they came back again,
That's
so.
because they said, we'll see what happens at the next meeting, because there's this thing planned. They go to the website, which suggests there's going to be a big trash orchestra, lots of people involved and stuff. And so, again, they don't know what's going to happen, and they're trying to gather information. I'm not justifying...
Why didn't you just ask them?
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what should have happened.
In fact, I do believe that the mayor, Cynthia Matthews, actually sent an email to the police department offering to be an intermediary.
Yes, she
or
did.
to if there were. She heard about the situation. She emailed the police and said, if you guys need any help with this,
Let me know, and
let me know, and
nobody
I'll work it
nobody
out.
gets back to her.
Right.
So, and the group also says that no one from the police department ever contacted them above.
And the
table.
police report says the same thing, that
So,
nobody ever contacted
Somebody
them.
made a bad decision here, and that decision was to send these undercover cops. But then another decision was made when they were asked to investigate the situation. The very man, the deputy chief, Kevin Vogel, he is the one who assigned the officers to the undercover activity and made the decision. Why are you satisfied with the answer that the chief of police gives for why he allowed the deputy chief to investigate himself?
And this is where it comes back to the city council. My question is, why wasn't it just handed over to the police auditor, who represents somewhat of an independent investigation, or could take on an independent investigation? Why wasn't it seen on sort of prima facie that you have this person who gave the order doing the investigation?
Well, let's start with that question. What's up with that? What kind of department?
Typically,
let me address that.
Okay.
First of all, I don't view this package of pieces of paper as an investigation as much as I view it a compiling of all the facts. So I think, in as much as this is the record of what took place and all the communications that happened, I'm satisfied with it in that regard. However, I'm not satisfied with it in terms of interpreting what it means. And therein lies the problem. Yes, we wanted to give the police department license to, and freedom to go ahead and do what they have to do anyway in a circumstance like that. We couldn't get Bob Aronson, our auditor, to come in that quickly anyway. He wasn't available until this week. So what they needed to do anyway, we wanted them to move ahead quickly and do it. And we did put pressure on them to do it faster than they wanted to do it. They wanted to take an extra 3 weeks, but there was lots of public pressure from some people in the community, 2 of whom are here tonight, to do this more quickly. So I personally pressed to get the early date for the report.
Did the police?
And the result of pressing for that early date was that the other deputy chief was on vacation. There's only one deputy chief available, so that deputy chief took charge of compiling this information.
Well, I was going to ask you, why did not the police contact you and say, look, the only way we can do this is with this certain deputy chief, and that person's not here, so we'll have to wait till she gets back?
Well, I'll have to say, Mark, that I'm satisfied that that deputy chief did what he should have done, and I'm also satisfied that this and he gathered the data very well.
Well, this the headline here, and it was presented as an investigation, an internal investigation. Police probe is what the paper says, and I've heard it referred to as an investigation. And they weren't presenting it as just a collection of facts.
That's true.
This says internal investigation.
Well, and I'm satisfied that Bob Aronson drew the right conclusion that now he needs to look at this objectively, talk to those people that he thinks he needs to talk to, and draw conclusions independently, and that's good too. Mark, one of the things you need to understand in this situation is that nobody's happy with what happened. There isn't a soul who will say, yes, everything happened as it should. No one's saying that. We're all unhappy with the way things happen, and so we can use our 20/20 hindsight now and say, well, how should it have happened? In my case, I happen to disagree with Christopher. I think officers should have gone in plain clothes, because in uniform with a sidearm and mace and pepper spray and tasers, that's very intimidating. I'd like the officers to go in plain clothes and identify themselves as representatives of the police department who have a legitimate reason to come and find out what's going on. And maybe they would not have even stayed for the whole meeting. But that's my 20/20 hindsight, how it should have happened.
Okay. Well, you see how it feels, the way it feels.
I'm a little bit wondering about, if we go independent investigation, we were told at first it was an independent, or excuse me, an internal investigation. And internal investigation means that there's certain criteria that's used when they do carry out that internal investigation. And then in meetings with council members, they said that this is sort of one council member said a semi-internal investigation. I wasn't sure what that means, and now I'm looking at the report. It says internal investigation. So to me, this doesn't make sense, because I didn't think that somebody who's being investigated can investigate themselves, which in this case is what happened.
It's not a formal internal, let's clarify this. It's not a formal internal investigation.
Even though it says it right here?
Okay. It's not a formal internal investigation because no one has been charged, either by a member of the public or anyone else, the individual officers, with having violated some law or policy of the city of Santa Cruz. There was no policy, and there's no law that they particularly violated here. The question that's being investigated, and why the word is internal investigation, is because the police inside their own investigation gather this information. It's like the common English language, an internal investigation.
Okay. All right.
Nobody ever represented that they were going through the process of setting in motion one of these, going to the internal investigation division of the police department.
Sherry had something that she wanted to say.
Why wasn't Bob Aronson?
Go ahead.
I get to play the gender card here.
There you go.
I want to read another sentence from Bob Aronson's letter. He says, in regards to the decision to insert undercover officers into the planning meetings, this investigation is less an independent review of what took place than a rationalization to justify the decision. And there are very disturbing things in this report. There are profiles of the organizers, down to things like the tattoos on their bodies, the scars on their bodies. There are reports of the police department tipping off other police departments about legal demonstrations that were going to be happening in their communities. I find this a pretty disturbing document in many ways. On the other hand, I kind of want to agree with what else is being said here. I think a lot of people are feeling all sorts of things, embarrassed, they have egg on their face, we're feeling defensive, this is a difficult situation. I feel like it's sad. It's sad that so many resources of the city, so much time and energy is going into this. On the other hand, the First Amendment is the heart of our democracy. The First Amendment is what makes a democracy be a democracy. It's the right to express your opinions, to assemble freely, to have a public debate about what is it that we want our society, our city, our culture to look like and be about. And that's what's at issue here. And I believe in that regard what's important is our solution. What are we going to do about this? I mean, how are we going to not let this happen again, and what are we trying to protect, and what are our priorities?
Okay.
Well, so I believe that what the police chief has presented is actually completely inadequate. And I just want to refer to that because what it says, that the police department shall not undertake undercover operations within community organizations unless there is reasonable cause to believe that the group or individuals within the group are involved in the planning of or intending to engage in illegal and or violent activity. This means that if you say, we're planning a civil disobedience action at the Military Recruitment Center on 41st Avenue, under this policy, they have cause to insert undercover officers into that planning.
Because
that is
what?
not
because
okay.
What?
Because
illegal,
if
illegal
a member
activity?
of the group
Okay.
or the group itself is planning an illegal activity, any illegal activity. So we've presented to the council, there's also an ordinance or a model policy up in San Francisco that's much stronger than this.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's the one we should adopt, but it's much stronger.
All right.
And under those set of rules, the department could never have sent undercover officers in.
Well, what I'd like to do is give out our phone number. This is a call-in program, Voices is. Our number here is 425-8844. If you'd like to join our discussion, give us a call. What it feels like, what the whole thing feels like to ordinary people is in this era of Homeland Security and Patriot Act business, We are finding out information about the president approving the National Security Agency to spy on the phone calls of U.S. citizens. We are hearing on the about the UCSC students against war who were protesting the military recruiters on campus being on a list and being infiltrated by the federal government. And here on the local level, it feels like more of the same. And so I think people are understandably a little paranoid and upset about this. And I do want to get to where we go from here. But the real question is, it feels to everyone that the police are not being watched, and that they're basically doing whatever they want, whether it's legal or not, whether it's against the Constitution or not. And the only thing, you said that everyone is unhappy with this situation, Ed, but I would say that I don't know that anyone in the police department was unhappy with the situation until it was revealed.
That could be true. And as a matter of fact, when a police department like ours is putting along with I don't know if everyone is aware of it, but our police department, compared to all the other police departments, say within a 100-mile radius, our police officers do 4 times as many calls per shift as all the average other police departments around, because we have a small police department in a very, very busy town.
Yeah,
and
but
so
they have officers who can go and...
complete the thought. Our police
to
department is understaffed and very busy, and yet has to deal with everything. They can't just ignore some calls and say, well, I don't think that's important, I'll ignore it. So they have to try and follow up on everything. So they did what they could on this. I think they made a bunch of mistakes, and they were busy doing lots of other things, hopefully not making too many other mistakes. But we and you have brought it to our attention and to their attention. And they immediately responded with an internal policy that is in force right now. I agree it's not good enough, and there's a lot of things we haven't melded yet. For example, the constitutional issues are not combined with this yet, and that's something the council is going to have to accomplish and the Public Safety Commission is going to have to accomplish. But I think there's a problem here that no one can get their hands on, and that is illegal activity. If there is planned illegal activity, do we expect in some circumstances for the police to ignore that?
No, that's not the point. I think the point is, we have a phone call I want to take in a moment, but the point is should the police go undercover into someone's private residence to investigate? Let's say 5 or 6 senior citizens were planning to, I don't know, march down the street and obey all the traffic laws, walk on the sidewalk, but one of them in the meeting says, you know, I think I'll smoke a joint before I go. And that's an illegal activity, right? So the police now have, because it's an illegal activity, they have the right to infiltrate that group of seniors based on what they think is
You should probably use the example of jaywalking, because that would be a lower level offense. And I'm planning to jaywalk on Pacific Avenue, and you know, if they catch me, so what?
But, well, let me take this phone call. Mike from Santa Cruz. Mike, you're on.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I did go to the website because I was curious about this, the Thunder website, and a couple of quotes, if you would just bear with me here. On the website, it said it was going to be a celebration without permits and permission. It said that the purpose was blowing minds and making revolution. It stated that we, apparently these people who did not give their names, we make the city, not a bunch of you elected yahoos, and asserted that the organizers would, quote, reclaim the streets. Furthermore, the organizers asked for the volunteers to provide legal support, which, at least to me, suggested that they expected legal trouble.
Okay.
Okay, let me finish. And indicated that safety is a concern for the stilters and the fire dancers, indicating that there were going to be people on stilts and people with fire. Finally, the parade is described as combining 2 of the most popular pastimes in Santa Cruz. One, which I'm fine with, is dressing in costume. The other is resisting authority. And again, the organizers did not use their real names. So I think the police had very real reason to be quite concerned with this website.
Okay, hey Mike, can I ask you, do you think that concern justifies sending undercover officers into a private residence to...
Absolutely. It was a meeting that was announced, and
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because I'm looking at one of the flyers here, and one of the things it says about the flyers, it says, get a group together, start a marching band. This is one of the flyers from the last night DIY people. It says, get a group together, start a marching band, build puppets, get your bicycle friends together, form a dancing troupe, organize your kids' play group, anything. So, does this really seem like threatening behavior to you, Mike?
Yes, it does. When you're listening, you're reading selectively. You're part of it, but thrown
I'm
in
just
there.
reading the flyer.
Mike, why not go announced? Why not? Why go undercover? Why not just go and say, you know, we're concerned. We saw what the website said. Basically, if it's true what you're saying, that the website spelled it out, why not just go in and announce it?
If they were planning to do something illegal, and the policemen actually came in and announced who they were, what do you think would happen?
Well, they probably would ask them to leave and say, contact us on a more official channel. I think that's what one of the organizers said, that if they would have announced themselves, they would have been asked politely to leave and to contact them in another way and not come to their planning meeting.
Well,
I mean, the police were 25% of the people at the planning meeting.
Many of these types of situations, like up in San Francisco, have turned into extremely violent demonstrations, and I think the police were warranted in taking a good hard look at this and taking this type of action. That's my opinion.
Thanks for calling, Mike.
Thank you.
They do say on one of their flyers, he said they didn't use their real names, but it does say they mentioned two names here, Chris and Wes, and
I'd like to just go back a step to something Sherry had said earlier that I think is worth looking at. First of all, I'm not sure this was it wasn't your classic civil disobedience event, because typically when people do civil disobedience, at least in that tradition, and I've done this many times myself, you intend to be arrested. You're trying to make a point about it, usually an invalid law or some action on the part of authorities, and you are going to go and break that law or whatever it is that they told you not to do, and to make the point that you think it's wrong.
You're willing to risk arrest.
Moral or weird, whatever. And typically at that point, one of the things that's likely, you're not going to resist arrest in the sense of fighting with them or running away or something. You're boldly, morally proud of whatever you're about to do, and you stand there, and people differ on how they want to be arrested. Some people will cooperate and be arrested, and others want to be dragged away rather than doing anything to help the police out. But this situation that you'd raised earlier, Sherry, where somehow, look, what if a bunch of people were planning a civil disobedience action? We have First Amendment rights. You don't have a First Amendment right to do civil disobedience actions. You have a First Amendment right to gather, to parade in Santa Cruz without a permit, to walk down the sidewalk in a parade. You have a right to call a rally at some reasonable place that's not going to, just be dangerous or something. But none of us have a right to break the law because we think we know what's better. You have a right, if you do it, I would think you have a right not to be, brutalized or something, to be arrested with the least amount of force necessary to accomplish it. And so you posed it as a rhetorical question. What if a bunch of people were only going to be planning a civil disobedience action? Would the police have a right to try and gather information about what they were going to be doing? Absolutely. If in fact the civil disobedience action were one that threatened public safety, enough people involved in it. Let's take a concrete, real example in Santa Cruz. 300 people announced they're going to sit. We had a law at one point which no longer exists that made it illegal to sit down on Pacific Avenue. A bunch of people said, we're going to have a demonstration, going to go sit down there on Pacific Avenue because we think you should have a right to sit there. And the police, let's suppose, for the sake of argument, I don't know the details of this, that the group said, we're not going to get a permit, obviously we're just going to break the law, we're not going to talk to you, we don't want to have anything else. Would the police have the right to try and figure out what's this going to look like, how many people are coming, are they planning to quietly let us arrest them for their violation, or are they going to actually physically resist arrest? I think the police would have an obligation in terms of public safety issues to figure out what is this civil disobedience action likely to turn into. Now, typically, the smart way to handle this, and the way your group handles it, groups you've been in, and groups I've been in, and Christopher and everybody else, is you try and work this stuff out with the police ahead of time. We're going to violate the law. We want to make a point. We don't want anybody to be beaten. We don't want the police to go, freak out about this thing. And you talk to people about what you have in mind. You work the stuff out. You make your point. You either get arrested or you don't. There are bystanders who don't want to be arrested, and you deal with them. But what's happened in this situation is you have a situation where people said, pointedly, nobody's in charge of this event. Mr. Thunder said, there's nobody in charge of this event, i.e., I don't want to take responsibility for whatever the hell happens down here on New Year's Eve. I'm not in charge. We're all doing it together. So you've got a situation where, honestly, I don't think it justifies the police going into somebody's home before they tried to find out information in a less invasive way.
Well,
That's what they should have
call
done.
from Cheryl
But that doesn't mean they
Aptos.
shouldn't be
Let's
looking
take this
for
phone call first, and we'll come back to
I
it.
don't
Okay.
think that's what I
Cheryl?
said, but maybe I can talk about that later.
Hi, I wanted to ask a question. I looked at the website too, and I looked at some information, and it talked about a person who had seen the devastation of Katrina in New Orleans, and their response of how communities had to come together without the help of government. And they were looking at that, and that's kind of spurred their idea to try to start something like a community-based organizing thing. And so I think that's kind of, people are making a lot, it seems like they're making a lot of ideas about what the organizers have done for this parade, but they haven't actually, it doesn't seem like they're talking to organizers about it. And to me, when I think about like what happened in New Orleans, the fact that people had to learn how to do things for themselves. They couldn't rely on the government. And I think that more and more the way people see our government crumbling before their eyes, that has a lot of reasons why. And you know, a lot of people are disappointed right now, and you know the parade was canceled and stuff. That I think that instead of thinking like people are being malicious, that maybe that has something more to do with it. And then my question is, if the police felt that this was, and the council and/or the council members felt like this action was so illegal and/or malicious, why didn't they stop the people from marching then? Why didn't they go ahead and try to arrest them? And that's the end of my question. Thank you.
That's a good question, and we'll answer that. We'll address that in a moment. But first, I'd like to take a call from Stephen in Santa Cruz. Stephen?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I think this really comes down to where it ends for people like Mike Rotkin, who pretend to be on the side of the people, who pretend to be part of the anti-war movement, and who at the same time justify an illegal government that is spying on its people here at home, that is sending people off into a war for oil in the Middle East. And this guy, Mike Rotkin, is part of that system. He's part of the Democrat Party who voted for this war. He's part of the same war, part of that same system, the war on the people here who are trying to organize against the war in Santa Cruz.
What do you think of this particular activity, Steve? This the police going into the sending undercover officers into the planning meetings.
It's illegal. This is COINTELPRO. This is what got people mad at the government in the 1960s and 70s. They did this to Martin Luther King. They did this to the Black Panther Party. They did it to the anti-war movement. They infiltrated organizations. They disrupted organizations.
Well, do you think that the police do have a right to, first of all, be concerned about public safety in this particular case?
Well, I see the police being the #1 threat to public safety. The police are not here to keep us safe. They're here to hassle people who are on the left. I won a $20,000 lawsuit against the city government for distributing literature that these police did not like and beat me up for distributing it. And these same city council members are part and parcel of the whitewashing of the police brutality that goes on here.
Okay,
And
Steve, thanks for calling. We're going to get back to, first I wanted to address something that we mentioned about the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. What the First Amendment does guarantee is the right of the people peaceably to assemble.
Yes.
And so we're making a lot of assumptions about people when we talk about, an assumption was made that these people were not going to peaceably assemble based on the idea that they did not get permits.
And the ideas that they put out.
I mean, it's on their own website that they make clear that they see this, you know, that they're interested in challenging authority. There's a difference between, you know, the First Amendment guarantees your right to say that, you know, George Bush is evil or whatever nastier words you want to find to describe it, or that Mike Rotkin is evil if you don't like what I do or something.
And the right to peaceably assemble.
And to assemble and gather people together, to have joint people together to say the same thing and to argue for it and to gather petitions and to present them to the government and confront the government with your views. It doesn't guarantee you the right to plan an event that doesn't have permits. It doesn't guarantee you the right to like march down the street in the middle of the, you know, you could, again, it's in Santa Cruz, let me be clear about the law, it's very obvious in Santa Cruz. You have the right without any permits, without any talking to the police, doing anything else, to gather a bunch of people together and to walk down the sidewalk in a parade.
Okay.
And you can carry whatever signs you want to carry, and you have total right to do that. You don't have the right to block traffic in the middle of the street unless you get a permit to do it. That's what a permit's about for a parade. This group said, we don't need, I think they'll be happy with my paraphrase, we don't need no stinking permits because we're going to do it ourselves. I'm sympathetic to the idea because the organized effort on New Year's Eve just fell apart, that a bunch of people got together to do a parade, I think is a great thing. I encourage that.
John, we have John from Santa Cruz on the air. John, you have a question?
Yes, good evening. My name is Joanne, and
Joanne.
Yes, I want to ask you one important question. How come the California police unit or group can't just solve their problems here in California by doing the same thing that Mayor Giuliani did in New York, which he hired about like 600 other cops so they can put in control all this gang, because we are terrific to have other governments in America, such as Spanish governments and Italian governments or African governments. We want the American government. This is why we are in this country. So I want to know why you as Californian leaders can solve this problem about the gangs, because we are terrific to live in terror. I feel like I live in Iran or Iraq.
Well, thank you for calling,
You're welcome.
Joanne. I would like to get into where do we go from here and how do we fix this and how do is this something that should happen again in the future?
Could I just get one question answered? Why did you go for an internal investigation over a police auditor investigation? I'm trying to make this clear. So
simply an initial step.
Where's the auditor going to go from here?
It's the first step of any investigation, whether it's a formal internal investigation, which this wasn't, or even an informal information.
But the fact that the guy who authorized the investigation was investigating himself, and everybody realized this. No, everybody realized this, Ed, from the get-go. But I'm trying to clarify for folks who are watching, for the community, for policy-wise, if we're going to make policy, and that's what I'd like to talk a little bit more about. But why wasn't the internal investigation or an investigation done by the auditor rather than by the person who
the auditor was
authorized
not
it?
available yet. It's
The
that
problem,
simple.
here's who the police chief had available to deal with this. He could put the issue off for a while, which neither the many members of the public nor the council were interested in having this thing put off. He could have, and that was because the other deputy chief was out of town on vacation. He could have gone.
Deputy chief.
Can I just say this is 45 days?
Let me answer.
45 days
question,
out.
I'm going to answer. And then he asked. The next option he had was to get somebody else in the police department, a lower level officer, let's say a lieutenant or a sergeant, to investigate this thing. But the police chief's view, which he said in the paper, is that he doesn't think it's appropriate, and I agree with him, to have somebody at a lower level investigate their superior, because in fact, because people would complain about that too.
He thought it was more important to have a person investigate himself than to have a lower level officer investigate?
Yes.
I just want to add.
And he said, this is not the final investigation.
I want to repeat something I said earlier.
Okay.
What the deputy chief did was gather all this information. Yes, the department drew some conclusions in a little
This is not a lot of information. You know, there's a lot of
Well,
photographs
as far as they
email
can tell,
tapes.
and
It's
as
a
far as I
response
can
to
tell,
information requests from the
every
public
piece
is
of
how it got
information
gathered.
there is about this event.
Every email, every letter, every
So
thing that
I'm
they looked up,
satisfied that they
everything in a file
gathered
they had.
information
I don't think
well.
every email was there. I mean, there was email traffic, but some of it was one way. There were some people responding in the police department, responding to someone else, obviously responding to some other email, but there was no sign of that email.
And because what probably happened, we don't know, and that's what the investigator needs to look into, is in there's about 3 cases like that, is probably the person got an email, went out in the hall, and the question got answered out in the hall rather than with an email back, because it's a small police department. Not everything is done formally through email. So somebody, that's why I think you have half an email in some cases. But we'll find out. I don't know that that's true, but that's my guess.
Sherry, do you think that whenever there is something, okay, let's say there are a group of people who are planning to break the law by not getting a permit, and maybe they're going to block traffic, whatever they were going to do, why is there such a need to have to control the situation? There seems to be a mistrust. I remember a friend telling me when the earthquake happened in 1989, in the city of San Francisco, people began going out of their homes and helping other people, digging them out of rubble and things like that. Before too long, the police arrived and ordered everyone to go back to their homes and said, we'll handle it. In Mexico City, I believe in 1980.
68.
No, there was a big earthquake. In,
68, huge
no, there was a later one, I think, in the 80s. And anyway, what happened from a person who was there, who told me about the organizing that went on, people were trying to dig people out of the rubble because there weren't enough police. That group of people, mostly teenagers and young people, that went around and organized spontaneously to help people, ultimately became political organizers and may have helped lead to the victory of a different political party in the Mexican elections. Do you think the need to control by the police, which no one seems to question, is always justified when it can block potential people doing things on their own, gathering and starting movements? I was asking Sherry that long-winded question.
That's a long-winded question. I'm going to pass to Ed. I think Ed wants to answer this.
Well, I don't think that police do feel a need to control, nor do I think the community wants them to control everything. They clearly did not control the parade. They were just the undercover thing that we're concerned about. They wanted all the information they could gather about it. In fact, maybe because they were embarrassed a little bit about the undercover activity that had been revealed, they did not take any steps at all to control the parade. In fact, the parade blocked traffic and caused dangerous situations, and the police did nothing about it.
But what it sounds like both of you are saying is that the police were really justified in doing what they did, which is to send. I mean,
no, I did not say that. Let me clarify.
We both said no. Don't put words in our mouth.
I said that I was dissatisfied with what they did because they should not have been undercover.
But then you move on to sort of justify the concern that caused them to do this.
What questions do you want answered with the internal with the auditor investigation? I mean, I think the public wants some questions answered as far as did this happen before? And are we going to get a policy put in place that's going to stop this from happening in the future?
That's a good question.
You're on the right subject now. What kind of policy should be put in place? At what level should it be put? There's a whole question that we haven't even touched on yet, and that is, we've hit around the corners of it, but to go into a private residence without a search warrant has been found by the California Supreme Court to be illegal. Now, whether or not this undercover is to be done or not, maybe there is violent activity planned, still, they have to get a warrant. And I think the policy needs to be a lot more complete. It's fine for the police to have their own general order on this subject, but I think the council is going to have to weigh in and add to it. I think that's inevitable.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm just
we only have a few minutes left. Let me ask Sherry next.
I was going to say, we're 50 days out from when this first became public.
All right.
We're 30 days. They're asking for 30 more days.
Okay, we have three
We need to have
left.
some public meetings. We need to have the council weigh in.
Let me have Sherry answer what should we do next, and then I'll come back to you, okay? What do you think should happen now? What kind of policies should be enacted by the city?
I was hoping that the Public Safety Committee would come back with a recommendation to turn to Dick Wilson and to turn to John Barasoni and Howard Scarry, which they do many times. We've all seen them do it in council meetings, and say, we'd like back on our desk in 2 weeks the ordinances that now exist in Seattle, in DC, in San Francisco, which are all strong ordinances. The Attorney General has already drafted a policy in the late 1970s. He recommended that every city in the state of California adopt that policy, specifically guidelines about how the police interface with the the expression of the First Amendment. That's the job of staff, to get that back to us so we have a bunch of documents to begin to look at so we can craft a policy that really meets the needs of Santa Cruz and that takes as its first priority protecting the expression of the First Amendment, understanding that public safety is an issue.
Thanks, Sherry.
But first,
we have a
First
couple minutes
Amendment.
left.
You said I could go next.
Go ahead, Mike.
Chris, we're not talking about reinventing the wheel. Again, people, the other day the Public Safety Committee was saying, oh, this was rushed, or we're rushing into something. Again, we're 50 days out from when this first was acknowledged publicly in the newspaper. They want 30 more days. We're not talking about reinventing the wheel, as Sherry just mentioned. They have Seattle's ordinance, they have DC's ordinance, they have San Francisco's ordinance. You send it to your staff and you come back. It's time, and I think the council can do this, and I think that's what the public wants.
Thank you. Mike, you have the last word. We have about a minute left.
Quick word is, number one, when you draft policies and ordinances, you need to know what you're trying to address, and that's why getting the independent investigator for the city to actually tell us what does he think went wrong, not just with the investigation, but also with the undercover operation, would put us in a position to try and figure out appropriate language to draft. I'm sure we'll borrow stuff from those other ordinances and other places. And frankly, I just think Christopher's being impatient. It takes more than a couple days to come up with the policy for a major issue. I think people are very right to be concerned about the First Amendment and frankly Fourth Amendment issues here, in terms of those are about privacy and search. People are very right to be concerned about them, and I think the City Council needs to come up with an adequate policy to do it. But I think we've already seen what happens when you try and rush this thing, and that's not the way to go.
All right.
I think
Well,
we should
I'm
take
not
our
gonna
time
be asked
to
to
do the correct policy.
All right. Thanks for being here.
I'm
We're
not gonna be
pretty much out of
excused
time.
about being impatient on First
We're out
Amendment
of
issues
town,
because those
and
are our most important
I
issues.
want to invite our audience to tune in next week when we're going to be discussing the issue of the minimum wage, the proposed new minimum wage in Santa Cruz. This program will repeat this Saturday night at 7:30 on Channel 27, Channel 73 in Watsonville. Thank you for joining us, and I'd like to thank all my guests for being here. It was a lively discussion.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.